Hi, is this Mark?
Hey, Courtney, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Good to talk to you again.
Good to speak to you too. I'm jealous that you're seeing this show in New York.
I am jealous that you're seeing that show in London because I won't get a chance to.
At the moment, we can't do that, but so we can talk about the work instead.
You know, what's interesting about this is that this show is seemingly split in half in a way that I think mirrors Frank's life. He definitely had a vibrant young adult student life, and then he moves to New York, and then he has, this amazing career in New York, and then returns to London, where he's primarily lived since '75.
I know that one of the works that you probably can see from where you're sitting is Texas Louise, which is one of the matte paintings that was in Frank's solo show at the Whitney Museum in 1971.
71, 6 paintings go into the Whitney exhibition, and 2 of them are here, both Polish Rebecca and Texas Louise. They are among the largest work they ever completed, but that first 71 show is probably one of the smallest physical spaces that those paintings of that size could have been shown in.
Yeah.
They're called map paintings. It's sort of a misnomer in a way because they don't actually depict maps, nor are they cartographic. They show a stencil of the outline of specific continents. Sometimes the continent is South America, sometimes it's Africa, sometimes it's Asia. It is just this kind of faint outline that's incorporated into the whole of what is otherwise a color field painting. They're largely created in New York in his studio, which was on Broadway at the time, but they were completed with an epidiascope that he received from Larry Rivers, with whom he was very close at the time. And I don't know if Rivers got a new epidiascope because he used one as well. But when he gave his to Frank, Frank began using it all the time, and to this day still owns it.
Do you think that Frank's own writing about other Black artists at this time gives a way into thinking about the matte paintings? Because he didn't really write too much about his own art, but about others.
When Frank first arrived in London and then goes into the RAF and then returns, and by '53, I think that he is really thinking very seriously about poetry and about literature. And so I think that sense of being a writer always stayed with him. And I don't think there was much crossover between the writing and his own practice as a visual artist. Right. And the fact that he doesn't really write now, I think, is more of a case of the painting being the thing that he needed to do. I've never heard Frank say that he needed to write. I think he liked to write, and I think he's quite good at it, but I don't think he needed it in the way that he talked about having needed to paint.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm really interested in is how at this period he seems to be able to use everything that's available to him as a painter. So there's not a painting that escapes pouring, but also spray paint. And he sands down some paintings, but then in other paintings he allows the paint to kind of pile on top of each other. He is not scared of exploring the possibility of the worked canvas at all.
Yeah, yeah. And in the years after the Whitney show, he started doing kind of different kinds of work. He got rid of the stencils and any imagery, as you know. And I think there's another work that's in the New York show comes from the poured paintings of the mid-'70s, Rosebush. And by this time, he's got to know Clement Greenberg, who's one of the great critics of modernist painting and total abstraction. Do you think that dialogue gave him confidence to get rid of imagery and to think about his work in new ways?
I don't know if that dialogue changed his own engagement with imagery. I think moving away from the conversations in London about figuration, because even if you look at the British painters that he knew, there is still a conversation around becoming fully abstract, right? So you look at somebody like Bacon, and he's interested in exploring abstraction, but he is still very much tied to the figure as a place from which abstraction must begin and end, right? Yeah. And I think that the move to America allows Frank to let go in a way that he might not have been able to do. I'm not sure. I can't imagine a Frank who stayed in London throughout the '70s.
Yeah.
I think there's always a way in which where Frank is determines what the paintings will be realized as. You know, he also talks about, you know, the flow of the River Thames that he looked at, you know, from 1950 on. It's this way in which that constant estuary was something that he was drawn to, but also felt that, you know, it invaded his dreams. And then, you know, he talks a lot about the busyness of New York and what living in a hectic city did for his painting practice.
Yeah, yeah.
So tell me, Mark, for you, looking at the paintings of the 60s and 70s and then moving into the 1980s, there's a huge change to both the surface quality, but also to the materials used. What do you make of that?
As you say, strange objects accumulate on the surface of these paintings. I'm looking at a painting called Rock Face, but I think in the show where you are, there's Armageddon and Enter the Dragon. You see these lengths of foam, and I think it's foam that came from packing foam. So, you know, maybe it's something that was around the studio, maybe when he was ordering in paint. He lays it down in strips, but sometimes he cuts up the strips into clusters, and you never really see it for what it is because it's always encrusted in very thick paint. The pigment's mixed within a gel, an acrylic gel, and is often layered on in scoops or sort of spatulaed on. So there's this very heavy surface. So I often look at it and think of, you know, the surface of the seabed. It reminds me of things concealed under the waves or under the sand, things washed up on the shore. So very much connected to, you know, his interest in rivers and coasts and place, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You know, I think there's a very long period of time where he is building up surface depth in the canvas just by using paint. You know, more paint, allowing it to pool, sanding off layers, adding more paint in. This process that he calls wet to wet, where, you know, you've got more paint going on over the top of paint that has not yet dried, so that you do get that kind of buildup. It almost feels as if he's making a relief out of a 2D painting. And then he gets to the 80s, and I think he sees that foam at a certain point and realizes that he can use it to do the work of depth that he'd been trying to achieve with paint alone. Yeah. And so then it becomes a kind of, you know, it's an underlayer. It's, you know, it's the ability to paint over something as opposed to just using the paint by itself.
And it is, I mean, he's always, you know, out to find a new way of structuring a painting. Another thing that he does is compose a single painting from 7 or 8 different canvases.
There have always been ways that Frank was willing to play with a canvas, meaning that, you know, it is not unusual for him to think that the canvas is not static.
Yeah.
That it, you know, that he can cut it up, he can add to it. Famously, by the late 80s, he is sewing onto canvases and lengthening them or you know, making them wider in certain cases. You know, the canvas is able to take a lot. And he is willing to do a lot to it to sort of test its ability to withstand it. So if he has to add or if he has to subtract from it, it is if he's put a painting through its paces in order to get it to the place that it needs to be for him.
I was really struck at the opening of this show in London, which is his first show with Hauser and Wirth, and there was a beautiful lunch. But he really wanted to leave just because he wanted to get back to the studio. And obviously, you know, this is someone who constantly is thinking about what a painting needs or what a composition requires, and really can't wait to get back to do more and to think more. It's amazing.
Absolutely. When I first met Frank, I was in my 20s, and I was so impressed by that dedication. It gave me a sense of what an adult painter's life should be like, that you should be looking for every opportunity to be in your practice, and that anything that gets in the way of that is just that, something in the way.
I mean, for many years, these works weren't seen. I mean, we're looking at works that were made in the 70s, 80s, 90s, but there were very important exhibitions, of course, but a lot of the time they were rolled up or in storage. Now that they're out in the world more frequently, do you have a sense of younger artists looking at them or them having an impact on the way we talk about painting?
I don't know. That's a good question. I do think that they were seen by some people. I think one of the things that, looking at it from both the American side but also the British side, is that, Frank always regularly showed. And while he might have been showing in smaller venues or sometimes he was showing in commercial venues, the work was there, maybe not all of it. Growing up, I saw Bowling's work, and there were, a number of paintings that were in private collections that were known to people. So I think that maybe what we're experiencing now is a move where people are talking about what they're seeing more as opposed to just seeing it and not talking about it.
Sure.
Whether younger people take these works, I can't say, but I do think that he is being put back into the spaces of art history, where I think that the work was always. I think also perhaps, and this, I don't want to date us, Mark, but for us, what we learned about abstract expressionism, I don't think that it's being taught the same way anymore. And I hope it's not, because I think that it was always taught with a kind of post-45 American-centered hierarchy, one that was heavily reliant upon the idea that School of Paris had to fail in order for New York to succeed. That kind of conversation, I think, has been disrupted, and I think it allows for looking at what Frank is doing in a very different light. One of those for me is that the conversation around abstraction is much longer, and it might be one that we're still in.
Great. All right, well, lovely to speak.
Good to talk to you, Mark. Take care, and I hope to see you again soon.
Okay, cool. All right.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye.